This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. We spend the rest of the hour remembering the remarkable life and legacy of the groundbreaking Irish singer, songwriter, political activist Sinead O'Connor, who's died at the age of 56. She was found unresponsive last Wednesday in her London home. Her friend, the musician and activist Bob Geldof, has said she sent him text messages, quote, laden with desperation and despair in the weeks before her death as she coped with the tragic death of her son, Shane O'Connor, by suicide about a year and a half ago at the age of 17. Sinead had 4 children. This is part of a TikTok video. It's the last video Sinead O'Connor shared shortly before her death.
You know, the way your kid, unfortunately, passing away, it isn't good for one's body or soul, to be fair. But anyway, look, let's not dwell on that. Anyway, hi guys. Here's my nice flat. Let me see, can I flip the camera? Oh, well, anyway, there's a bunch of flowers my friend gave me today. My nice flat. There is my new Martin Johnny fucking Cash guitar that I am going to write some tunes on.
Sinead O'Connor rose to stardom in 1990 when she released her version of the Prince song, Nothing Compares to You. The song was on her second album, I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got, which also included her own song, Black Boys on Mopeds, about the 1983 death of a 21-year-old black man in London named Colin Roach in police custody after they accused him of stealing his own moped. The police said Roach had died by suicide. The inner sleeve of Sinead O'Connor's album showed a photograph of Roach's parents standing next to a poster of their son. In 1992, Sinead performed Bob Marley's War on Saturday Night Live, then proceeded to rip up a photo of Pope John Paul II on live TV, declaring, quote, fight the real enemy. The move, a protest against systemic child abuse in the Catholic Church, of which she was a survivor, provoked widespread uproar. She addressed her SNL performance days later during an interview with Entertainment Tonight.
Ireland has the highest instance in Europe of child abuse. I experienced it myself, and I found his presence in Ireland, telling the young people of Ireland that he loved them, hilarious. At least when I studied the history, I found out that the people who were responsible for telling lies in the first place were the Vatican, who, through permitting the invasion of countries and the destruction and murder of entire races of people in the name of God and for money, and then their subsequent overtaking of the educational systems of all the countries that they went into, led to distortion of historical fact.
A week after her Saturday Night Live appearance, Goodfellas star Joe Pesci appeared on SNL and had this response during his monologue.
She was very lucky it wasn't my show, because if it was my show, I would have gave her such a smack.
2 weeks after Sinead's SNL appearance, O'Connor was booed at a Bob Dylan tribute at Madison Square Garden after being introduced by Texas country singer Chris Christopherson.
I'm real proud to introduce this next artist whose name's become synonymous with courage and integrity. Ladies and gentlemen, Sinead O'Connor.
Sinead O'Connor was set to perform Bob Dylan's I Believe in You, but as the crowd continued to boo, she responded by singing part of War by Bob Marley, the same song she sang on Saturday Night Live.
Okay, turn this up. Until the philosophy which holds one race superior and another inferior is finally and permanently
A decade later, in 2002, an investigation by the Boston Globe shined a spotlight on sexual abuse and its cover-up in the Catholic Church. Sinead O'Connor was an ally of the LGBTQ community's March for Abortion Rights decades before it was legalized in Ireland. She converted to Islam and started using the name Shuhada Sadaqat in 2018 alongside the name Sinead O'Connor. She spoke out for Palestinian rights, respecting the Palestinian civil society call for BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel, once saying, quote, "On a human level, nobody with any sanity, including myself, would have anything but sympathy for the Palestinian plight. There's not a sane person on earth who in any way sanctions what the Israeli authorities are doing," Sinead said. Earlier this year in March, Sinead O'Connor was met with a prolonged standing ovation at the RTE Choice Music Awards when she received the new award for Classic Irish Album for "I Do Not Want What I Have Not Got." And judges called her album, quote, "a stunning body of work by an Irish artist, scorching with originality and songs that are as resonant today as they were more than 30 years ago," unquote. One of the last photographs of Sinead shows her beaming as she accepted the award and dedicated it to, quote, "all refugees in Ireland." For more, we're joined by two guests. Jamie Manson is president for Catholics for Choice, and Allyson McCabe is a music journalist and author of the book Why Sinead O'Connor Matters, which was published in May. Her new piece for Vulture is headlined, "Sinead O'Connor was always a protest singer." Allyson, let's begin with you. Give us that history and your response to her passing last week.
Well, thanks so much for having me on the program, also for describing her as a political activist. I think that's something that the world is just really catching up on now. Of course, I'm gutted and I'm shocked and really haven't had much sleep since Wednesday, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to join you and to talk about her music and her life and her legacy. Like a lot of the world, for a long time, I knew that her hair was shaved. I didn't necessarily know that that was something that she decided to do very early on in her career, before the release of her first album in '87, as really an act of defiance against the recording label who wanted to market her on her appearance rather than the strength of her music. I knew that she had had a mega hit in 1990 with Prince's Nothing Compares to You, but I didn't know that she was not one of Prince's protégés, and that that was not a major hit in his repertoire before she recorded it and made it into a worldwide hit. I knew that she tore up a photograph of the Pope on Saturday Night Live, but I didn't necessarily know that she was trying to draw attention to the crisis, the child abuse crisis in the Catholic Church, which we all now know was real. So it really was catching up on all of that as an adult and as a journalist that made me go back and re-examine different things that she had said, the statements that she made over the years, the music that she made, not just up into '92, but really to the end of her life. She continued to make music, and she always spoke out against injustice. And sometimes she didn't say something perfectly. Sometimes her message wasn't always heard, but she never stopped trying. And I think that's really the key takeaway, is that she never, ever, ever stopped trying. And it's not enough for us to now say that she was a brave warrior. We have to be brave warriors, and we have to have those conversations that she tried to spark from the very beginning of her career.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Jamie Manson, president of Catholics for Choice, when she tore up that photo of Pope John Paul II in 1992, you were living in Long Island in a traditional Catholic Italian family. And what was your response then, and how do you assess her life?
Yeah, I was surrounded by men like Joe Pesci, and I had a very different experience, though, of that incident than my family did. I, too, felt called to the priesthood the way Sinead did. And I think what's so important to understand about her is that what she did came out of great love of the church. And she said that in the recent documentary. She felt she had the right to fight this evil because of her love of the church. And she felt she had a contract with the Holy Spirit to speak out, and not to diminish the importance of child sex abuse, but Sinead understood the pervasive harm John Paul II was doing, setting back women's rights by potentially centuries. creating the theologies that developed so much sexual shame. And she understood that this was happening globally. What she was seeing in Ireland had global consequences. And so it's so important to understand, you know, she's like a true prophet. She saw things no one wanted to see. She said things that no one wanted to hear. And she risked everything for that. And she basically lost everything. And a sense of, in terms of assessing the current state of things, it's important to remember that Pope Francis canonized John Paul II in 2014. So it shows you how far we still have to go and how prophetic she really was.
Allyson McCabe, we only have 2 minutes to go in this segment, and then we'll doing part 2 and posting it at democracynow.org. But if you could then talk about the rest of her life, because every aspect was acclaim, praise, pushing the limits, being attacked, but it never stopped her.
It never stopped her. And, you know, she said that what happened on SNL didn't derail her career. She said it re-railed her career because it set her back on the path of what she saw as her calling, you know, as your other guest said. She never intended to be a pop star. That's something that just happened when that song blew up in '90. But if you look at the rest of her catalog, before then and after then, she continues to make music with meaning, excellent music. Music that we really have a lot to catch up on in terms of the issues that she was raising, not just talking about child abuse, but as you mentioned at the top, you know, talking about she was anti-racist, you know, she was speaking out against sexism, she was early on talking about HIV/AIDS awareness, and so many other issues. We could go on and on. I know we don't have a lot of time, but it was all in there. And when I saw that, you know, that was really what inspired me to reframe her narrative. And, you know, now there's this outpouring of love, and my only regret is I wish she were alive to experience that. You know, it's coming now, but I wish that she'd experienced some of that during her lifetime.
Well, in a blog post that was widely shared, the musician Morrissey slammed the music industry, the media, celebrities, and others. He said, "We're hypocritical and cynical for paying tributes to Sinead O'Connor only after her death." He wrote in part, "You praise her now only because it's too late. You hadn't the guts to support her when she was alive, and she was looking for you." Allyson, can you talk about that particular photograph of Pope John Paul II that she ripped up? The physical photograph had hung on the wall of her house. Is that right? Where she would be abused by her deeply religious mother. Can you take it from there?
Thank you. Yes, to clarify, Sinead was not a survivor of clergy abuse. She was a survivor of abuse at the hands of her devoutly religious mother. And the photograph was a souvenir from the Pope's 1979 visit to Ireland. And Sinead's mother died when Sinead was in her teens, actually on the way to Mass. She got into a fatal car accident. And Sinead hung on to that photograph because for her, it was a symbol, as she said, of lies, liars, and abuse. And what she meant by that, as your other guest mentioned, is to destroy it wasn't to attack the faith or to attack the Pope, but it was to attack really the hypocrisy of an institution that would protect predators and silence survivors. You know, I think for her that was really the key. And so she was really at the height of her fame. Now, this was all during monoculture, where, you know, the whole world would be watching TV at the same time, looking at the same thing. So she knew there'd be an opportunity here to really make that statement. And actually, afterwards, her publicist at the time said, you know, "I can't fix this for you." And her response was, "Good." You know, and I think that really tells you a lot about where her thinking was, that she knew she had this moment to make this big statement, and she was going to take that moment, and was not at all thinking about the impact on her career.
And Allyson, you interviewed Sinead back in 2021 for an NPR profile after her memoir Rememberings came out. What was it like when you met her back then? Why did you decide to write the book?
So I'd actually met her, you know, before the profile came out. So my piece came out the day that her book came out. I had already been deep into this re-examination, again, of her music and her statements over the years. And that happened, I actually had seen a pair of videos by another artist, Fiona Apple, talking about Sinead O'Connor. And it really got me thinking about this rise that happened so quickly and this fall that happened so quickly. And then as I started to sort of re-examine why that happened, I realized that the deeper I got into learning about Sinead, I was also learning about the culture. So in the segment, we talked about Joe Pesci appearing the following week and making that heinous statement. But I also noticed that he didn't get booed. He didn't get canceled. What happened was the audience laughed and they applauded. You know, so for me, the point wasn't just that Pesci was a misogynist. The point was that the culture was a misogynist. And that's why those lines landed the way that they did. So the deeper I got into that, I realized I wasn't just looking at Sinead, I was looking at the culture. And looking at the culture, I also had to think about my own relationship to that as a journalist. So by the time I sat with Sinead for that interview, I already had all of that context and background. I already knew there was much bigger story here than I could possibly do in a radio profile, which realistically is roughly 5 minutes long. I'd been prepared to meet somebody who I wasn't even sure if she would show up. You know, there's been so much misreporting on Sinead O'Connor, you know, so much misreporting on her mental health, yet it's been used to discredit her, that has been used to weaponize her. I didn't know even if she would show up or what she would say. What I encountered was a woman who was on time and on point and not evasive and very generous in answering all of the questions that I had. And the biggest challenge in doing that piece was getting everything she told me into like the 5-minute frame that I had on the air. So I knew there was a book, and that's why I continued to stay with the story.
I wanted to bring Jamie Manson into this conversation, president of Catholics for Choice. Cardinal Bernard Law of Boston said that her actions on SNL, you know, ripping up the Pope's picture, were a gesture of hate and neo-anti-Catholicism. Law would later resign for covering up abuse in the Catholic Church. And I wanted to read from the New York Times. At the age of 14, Sinead O'Connor was sent to live at an Griannan training center in Dublin, which was run by the Order of Our Lady of Charity. It had formerly been a Magdalene laundry, a facility where a so-called fallen woman might spend her entire life washing the dirty laundry of the surrounding community. Can you tell us about this aspect of her life and who she was raised by and being in this laundry?
Yeah, I think Cardinal Law's statement is so interesting to call it an act of hate, because what I think, in fact, it was is a story and an act of love and fear. And I think that her love for the church was so profound. That's what motivated her. And I don't think you can discount how scary it is to confront the church in a very public, graphic way. And what motivated that is, I think, exactly what she saw in those Magdalene laundries. Those were places of punishment for women. I often like to say there were no Magdalene laundries for men. They were for women, and very often they were for young women who had got pregnant out of wedlock, with absolutely no accountability, of course, for the boy who got them pregnant. And so she saw the crushing misogyny of the church and the sexual shame it created. And she understood, as a prophet does, you know, they see what's happening in the present, and they read those signs of the present, and they understand that there are profound future ramifications for this. And it's so important to understand that we don't even begin to know the extent of clergy sex abuse in the world. And she could see that then. And she knew that John Paul II was the person who created those theologies, who developed those theologies, that created the idea that abortion is murder, and that women can never be equal to men, and the idea that children are there for the sexual gratification of men. You know, the Catholic Church is a profound, radical patriarchy. She understood that, and she spoke about it at a time when no one was ready to hear it. And she risked everything to speak that truth, and she could not speak that truth, no matter what risk it took.
Yet, despite that highly patriarchal institution, she continue to maintain her Catholicism and her lifelong spiritual quest. How do you reconcile that, and also then her decision to convert to Islam?
I think she was on a profound spiritual journey. I really relate to her as a girl. I also felt deeply in love with the church and felt God was calling me to the priesthood. And she, in 1999, was ordained a Catholic priest by a rite of the Catholic Church that had broken away. And so for her, it was all a journey. She was in love with God, and she thought that religion was the greatest enemy of God. And I think that was her vocation, was trying to understand what God was calling her to in any given moment. And that led her to all sorts of religious expression. But this is at her core a love story, I think, with God and with the Holy Spirit and with justice. You know, her sense of justice was profoundly formed by her faith. And I hope that is an enduring part of her legacy.
I wanted to go to more deeply into that conversion, Allyson McCabe. You have Sinead O'Connor, an ally with the LGBTQ communities. You have her marching for abortion rights long before abortion was legalized in Ireland. And then you have her converting to Islam and starting to use the name Shuhada Sadaqat in 2018, alongside her name, Sinead O'Connor. She spoke out for Palestinian rights, respecting the Palestinian civil society call for BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel, once saying, on a human level, nobody with any sanity, including myself, would have anything but sympathy for the Palestinian plight. There's not a sane person on earth who in any way sanctions what the Israeli authorities are doing, she said. Can you talk about that transition point in her life?
Well, we didn't discuss her reversion at length, but I would say this. What I tried to do was consider it in the context of, many male musicians, many of her counterparts, including Bob Dylan, the Beatles and others, had also experienced religious traditions other than the ones they were born into. They also took spiritual journeys that led them to different places. And really, it wasn't seen as controversial as those that Sinead took. So I just found that kind of interesting that, once again, we saw a sort of double standard there, just as we saw a double standard where when she, after the period of the 90s, made music in all different kinds of genres, right? When male musicians do that, genius. When she does it, it's considered like she can't decide. She's veering unpredictably from genre to genre.
Allyson, I'd like to ask you, when you were writing the book Why Sinead O'Connor Matters, what most surprised you in terms of her life story that you think readers should know about?
I think that early on, the most surprising thing was that she continued long after she stopped making chart hits to make music. And then the second thing that surprised me is how much that music was really part of this lifelong fight against injustice, that it was something that she never abandoned. Throughout all the various changes in her life, who she married, who she unmarried, what religious tradition she was following. All of these things, people got kind of fixated on these nonstop sort of tabloid headlines that were just noise. And I don't think that was accidental. I think that noise was there because that's what kind of like people, that's sort of how the media sort of often responds to things. Is like, let's go for the shocking thing. Let's go for the, we call it clickbait now, but even before that had a name. And I think that was because what she was doing was really powerful. And I think in some ways it was suppressed. So I think for me, what was surprising was the degree to which that happened, not just accidentally, but kind of understanding and looking at the ways that people covered her and her story after SNL. And then what she was actually lining that up with what she was actually trying to do with her music during these various points. And so for me, I think that I've often heard her described as fearless. And I wouldn't really say that. I would say that she was afraid. But what bravery is about being afraid and doing it anyhow. And doing it anyhow because it's worth it. Because we need to create a space where people can talk and people can listen. And I think if we're able to talk and listen to each other, that's how change gets done. And if I could, I'm thinking back now to one of her songs from 1994, which is a song called Famine. And in Famine, she talks about her experience, connecting it to the experience of the Irish people. And she says, if there's ever going to be healing, there has to be remembering, then grieving, so then there can be forgiving. There has to be knowledge and understanding. To me, it's just such a profound reflection of what she was really all about.
I'm wondering, Allyson McCabe, if you can talk about her solidarity way before, to say the least, the killing of George Floyd, with the Black community around issues of police violence, most famously her song Black Boys on Mopeds about the 1983 death of the 21-year-old Black man Colin Roach in police custody in London.
I've said this before now. You said I was childish and you'll say it now. Remember what I told you. If they hated me, they will hate you. England's not the mythical land of Madame George and her roses. It's the home of police who kill black boys on mopeds. And I love my boy, and that's why I'm leaving. I don't want him to be aware that there's any such thing as grieving.
And, you know, even what she had in her shaved head, the solidarity with Public Enemy, and understanding who gets marginalized and who doesn't.
Yeah, her anti-racism was there from the start, even before, you're talking about the 89 Grammys. But, you know, on her first tour in America, which, you know, was coinciding with the release of The Lion and the Cobra, her first album in '87, you know, she's seeking out and spotlighting local rap and hip hop artists on every date on the tour. So one was, I grew up in Philadelphia, one was nearby in Trenton at a place called City Gardens. Her opening act was MC Lyte, who was roughly 16 years old at that time. So that was something that she was committed to early on. The '89 Grammys was her first primetime television appearance in the U.S. She had been on David Letterman, but this was primetime, again, at a time when everybody was watching the Grammys. And she was up for Best Female Rock Vocalist Female. That category has sort of shifted a little bit, but that was what it was called at that time. And she was going to come on and perform her single Mandinka. But that year was the first year that the Recording Academy was going to present an award for rap, but they weren't going to televise that presentation, citing limited airtime. She called BS on that, okay? Because at that point, where rap was, record executives, you know, and people who are sort of the gatekeepers in the industry really saw rap as either dangerously subversive or a passing fad, but it was something that was popular, so popular they couldn't really ignore it, you know, at all. And so they decided to, again, give the award, but not televise the award. In response, some of the nominees boycott the ceremony. She showed up to do the performance for, you know, again, she's up for Best Female Rock Vocalist, and decides that, look, I shaved my head because I didn't want you to pay attention to my appearance, but you are paying attention to my appearance, so let me then convey a message. And she wore Public Enemy's logo, which Chuck D has described as, it's a black man in the crosshairs of a gun, as the black man in America. She wore that in the side of her hair. She also wore her infant son's sleep suit tied around her waist because the record executives told her not to carry. She became pregnant during the sort of the time that she was making that album. She was in a relationship with the drummer in her band, and they pressured her to not have the child. She decided to have the child, and wore his sleep suit around her waist. You know, that was another middle finger, in a way, to the recording industry, you know, and the pressures that they placed on women. So it was like there were a lot of symbols going on. That was also true during the SNL performance. But for now, let's go to this thing about what was happening at the Grammys. You know, she repeatedly called out MTV for censoring black artists by not playing music videos that black artists made. And it wasn't just rap and hip hop. You know, for a long time, MTV wouldn't get behind, for example, Whitney Houston, who was not a rap or hip hop artist. It wasn't until her music was at the top of the radio charts that they couldn't really ignore it anymore, and they got behind Whitney Houston. So Sinead was always calling this out when she accepted awards, when she sat with press. She wasn't talking about promoting her album. She was talking about these issues. I think I want to put this in context to say she was an anti-racist, but it isn't to say, isn't it wonderful that this white woman was doing all of this stuff? It's to say how not wonderful it is that there weren't many other people also talking about this stuff at the same time, okay? Because racism, like homophobia and sexism and all kinds of injustice, they're all everybody's problem. And if we're not all talking about it, that's a problem too.
A tweet from Chuck D last week, rest in beats and power, Sinead O'Connor, who always brought the noise, he said. And then reading from one of the remembrances of her, as her star rose even higher, so did the scrutiny when O'Connor withdrew from a 1990 appearance on Saturday Night Live after learning that the comedian Andrew Dice Clay was scheduled to host. The Dice Man, known for his misogynistic and homophobic routines, performed a skit poking fun at the bald chick after O'Connor declined to have the national anthem played before a show at New Jersey's Garden State Arts Center. Frank Sinatra said she must be one stupid broad and threatened to kick her ass. The piece went on to say politicians organized protests against O'Connor. DJs refused to play her records. O'Connor was widely accused of censorship when it was she who was being censored. She was also criticized for being anti-American, ungrateful for the success she had achieved. Still, that fall, she swept the MTV Video Music Awards with wins for Best Female Music Video and Best Postmodern Music Video, and even bested Madonna for Video of the Year. I was just reading from your article, Allyson McCabe, that incredible history.
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked myself. So, I mean, when I first read about all this is why I came to the conclusion that this was, a much bigger story than something I could tell in 5 minutes. I'm not even sure that in my book I was able to tell it all, but I tried. I tried to do that to really honor what she was about, at her core. And again, it wasn't about the tabloid stuff. That is noise. It's really about this. And remember that the part you're talking about now happens before 1992, before SNL. So she already has this resistance that's building. I think she's aware of that resistance. And I think that also explains why after she had this huge album with I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got in 1990, she followed in 92 with an album of show tunes and standards. That's not really the move that one would make if they're thinking, I want to, maintain that commercial success at the top of the charts.
Jamie Manson, it was not only around the issue of sexual abuse in the Catholic Church, but Sinead was out there decades before Ireland legalized abortion for abortion rights, an ally of the LGBT community. Talk about how she was received among Catholics.
I think that she was received the way a prophet is always received. They're not understood in their time. And I'm just so interested to see all the people that are suddenly coming out and praising her, because they're people that probably would not support her in the present moment. And I think it's easy to praise her posthumously, but at that time, what she did was profoundly lonely. And I have some personal experience at Catholics for Choice. We did an action at the Basilica in which we were projecting facts about abortion and the fact that so many Catholic women, 1 in 4 abortion patients in the U.S., has an abortion. And we have a church that refuses to acknowledge that and continues to call abortion murder while women who are having abortions are sitting in their very pews. And so what Sinead shows us is that she's a woman of profound hope. She keeps speaking and keeps speaking, and having conversations that are not welcome within the walls of the church. But you have to keep speaking out, whether it's about LGBTQ rights, whether it's about women's equality, abortion rights. These are all issues where the church has pervasive power globally and is causing profound harm. And that harm continues to this moment. And so it continues to be lonely to speak out about that. And so I hope that she will energize, her memory will energize people to keep speaking out and to keep making these changes, because the church, again, has the power that she understood that they have.
And finally, Allyson McCabe, if you can talk about the death by suicide of her son Shane and the effect it had on her, clearly to the end of her life, dealing with desperation and horror at what had taken her son.
I would just say that anybody who is a parent, myself included, I just can't imagine a bigger loss than losing one's child under any circumstances. You know, I just feel that, I know they were very close. You know, people have put up a lot of photographs beyond just the physical resemblance. They were very close. And I think that I'd come to see her as such a survivor, that even though she was dealing with this profound loss, there was a part of me that, you know, really thought maybe she would, I'm not going to say be okay, but I'm going to say pull through, the way she had pulled through so many other hardships in her life. And I knew that she, you know, she had the music from the Outlander theme that had come out, and she was making new music on an album, and she had recently returned to the platform formerly known as Twitter. And, you know, I just thought maybe she was reemerging into public life, and I just, you know, I think that was one of the reasons that I was so caught off guard, you know, to learn of her death. But I just, you know, I don't really know what to say aside from, you know, I hope that she has found Shane, and I hope that she has found peace.